I love the sound of falling snow. It's kind of like watching lightning or seeing a shooting star. It's just one of those unique things you have no control over that doesn't always present itself, but when it does, it's a treat. I'm not really the hiking type, but when it's snowing out, I just can't help myself. We've all got those irresistible cravings. This happened during one of those snowy nights. I live in a woodsy area. It's not really in the woods per se, but it's close enough. If I wanted to access an expansive, dense forest, I'd only have to drive a few minutes. I didn't have any major obligations the next day, so it was either a Friday or Saturday. Probably Saturday, because I remember being slightly hungover from going out the previous night. It also wasn't supposed to snow that night, which I remember specifically because I have a habit of checking the weather obsessively during the winter months. I was sitting in my room reading a book when it just started snowing abruptly, as if someone had just casually flipped a switch. I didn't even notice it at first. The thing about snow is how it lies to you. It makes the world look clean and soft, but really, it just absorbs the noise. You feel like you're alone because you can't hear anything else. But that's the trap. Silence isn't empty. It's just a space for something else to fill. I stepped out onto the porch, and for the first 10 minutes, it was perfect. I walked toward the tree lane, where the old logging road starts. I stopped to adjust my scarf, and that's when I realized the snow wasn't the only thing making noise. There was a rhythm. I'd take 3 steps, and there would be 4 sounds. I stopped. The world went dead quiet. I told myself it was just an echo bouncing off the frozen trunks, or maybe a clump of snow falling from a branch. You start gaslighting yourself immediately, because the alternative, that someone is pacing you, is too much to process when you're a mile from your front door. I turned my head slowly. Nothing but white static and gray shadows. I took another step. Crunch, crunch. It was closer. Much closer. I didn't run. If you run, you admit it's real. I just walked faster, my breath coming out in short, panic bursts that blurred my vision. My flashlight beam was shaking, and that's when I saw the shape. It wasn't a man standing there. It was a vertical sliver of darkness behind a birch tree. Too thin to be a person, yet it had a shoulder. It didn't move. It just existed in a way that felt wrong. I stood there for what felt like an hour, waiting for it to breathe, for it to shift. It didn't. I convinced myself it was just a stump, a trick of the light. I actually started to laugh, a dry, shaky sound. I turned my back to it to head home, feeling like an idiot. And that's when I heard the wheeze. It wasn't a scream or a growl. It was a wet, rattling intake of air, like someone inhaling through a throat full of needles, right against the back of my hood. I didn't look back. I didn't even feel my feet hit the ground. I just know that when I reached my truck and fumbled the keys, I glanced at the side mirror. The snow was falling perfectly straight, except for one spot, 5 feet behind my tailgate, where the flakes were swirling and breaking, as if they were hitting an invisible chest. If that silence just made your skin crawl, you're not alone. We're deep into the season where the shadows get longer. If you want to make sure you're not the one being paced in the dark, hit the subscribe button right now. Join us at Forgotten Screams. We're building something here for the people who look twice at the tree lane. Comment watching if you've ever felt that phantom breath on your neck. It lets me know you're still with me. The second story comes from a guy who lived in a house that was mostly glass. It was designed to let nature in, which is a beautiful concept until nature decides it wants to come inside. He was sitting in the living room, the only light coming from the fireplace, watching the blizzard coat the floor-to-ceiling windows. He noticed a smudge, just a small, blurred print on the outside of the glass, about 7 feet up. He figured it was a bird or the wind, but as he watched, another smudge appeared. Then another, slowly, rhythmically, like something was pressing its palms against the glass to steady itself while it peered in. He couldn't see a face. The snow was too thick. He just saw the pressure marks of hands that were far too long, moving slowly down the pane. He turned on the outside floodlights, expecting to see a prankster or a prowler. The lights kicked on, illuminating the swirling white void. There was nothing there. No tracks on the deck. No body. Just those wet, fading handprints on the glass, melting away from the heat of the house. He spent the rest of the night in the windowless basement, listening to the glass clink and shudder, wondering if the handprints were appearing on the inside. You have to wonder why we feel safer behind a thin sheet of glass. It's an illusion of security that the snow loves to dismantle. Take the case of a woman driving home through a mountain pass. The visibility was so bad, she was crawling at 5 miles per hour. She saw a figure standing on the shoulder, waving a red cloth. She stopped, thinking someone had broken down. The figure stayed in the shadows of the pines, gesturing for her to come closer, to step out of the car. She rolled the window down an inch, the freezing air stinging her cheeks. The person didn't speak. They just pointed down into the ravine. She looked, squinting through the whiteout, and saw the faint, flickering glow of a taillight deep in the snow. Her instinct was to jump out and help. But then she noticed the person with the red cloth. They were standing in 3 feet of fresh powder, but they weren't sinking. They were standing on top of it. She didn't stay. She drove to the nearest town and called it in. When the police found the car in the ravine the next morning, they found a body. It had been there for 2 weeks. There was a red scarf wrapped around the driver's neck, but there were no footprints leading from the wreck to the road. Just a single red scrap of fabric snagged on a branch, moving in the wind. The worst part of these stories isn't the ghost or the monster. It's the moment you realize your brain is trying to save you by lying to you. You see a shape, and you call it a tree. You hear a voice, and you call it the wind. By the time you admit the truth, it's usually too late. I still go for walks when it snows. I still love the silence. But now I always count my footsteps. And I never, ever look in the side mirror when I'm leaving the woods. Because some things don't want to be seen. They just want to be followed. If you're still here, looking at the screen, tell me, what's that sound coming from your hallway? Is it just the house settling? Or is the snow starting to fall inside too? Click the next video to stay in the dark with us. At Forgotten Screams, the story never really ends. It just waits for the next frost. The street lamps have a way of failing just when the snow gets heavy. It's never a flicker or a pop. It's a slow dimming, as if the cold is actually choking the light out. I was about halfway back to my truck when the last lamp on the trailhead died. The transition from orange light to that oppressive, bruised blue of a winter night is enough to make you doubt your own vision. I stood there, letting my eyes adjust, and that's when silence changed. It wasn't quiet anymore. It was muffled, like the world had been wrapped in cotton. I took a step, and the snow felt deeper than it had 5 minutes ago. I looked down, and for a second, I couldn't see my own feet. The white was so absolute it erased the ground. I started to walk, but the landmarks were wrong. There was a stump I remembered being on my left. Now it was on my right. I told myself I'd just turned around in the dark. It's easy to do. You get a little dizzy. Your inner ear plays tricks in the cold. But then I saw the trail of footprints ahead of me. I felt a wave of relief. Someone else is out here, I thought. I'll just follow their tracks back to the road. I followed them for maybe 50 yards before I stopped. I looked at the prints, then looked at my own boots. The tread was identical. The stride was identical. I wasn't following a stranger. I was walking in circle, but I hadn't turned. I'd been walking in a perfectly straight line, or so I thought. That's the moment the snow starts to eat your logic. You start to wonder if the forest is moving, or if the cold is just turning your brain into slush. I stood there, trying to catch my breath, and I realized I couldn't hear my heart beating. It was too quiet. I reached up to touch my pulse, and as I did, I heard a soft thump from directly beneath me. Not from the woods, not from the wind, from under the snow, right where I was standing. It felt like something had just shifted its weight 6 inches under my soles. I didn't scream. I didn't even move. I just felt this cold, oily sensation of dread slide down my throat. I told myself it was the ground settling, the frost heaving. But then it happened again. A slow, rhythmic vibration, like a giant lung expanding against the crust of the earth. I stepped back, and the snow where I had been standing didn't just sit there. It slowly began to smooth itself out, the footprints filling in from the bottom up as if something were pushing the powder back into place. If you're feeling that weight in your chest right now, that's the realization that the ground isn't always solid. Before we move into the next account, look at your window. Is the frost forming on the outside, or is it creeping across the inside of the glass? If you want to know why that matters, you need to stay with us. Hit the subscribe button and click that bell. Forgotten Screams is for those who know that home is just a box we hide in. Comment buried if you've ever felt like the room you're in is getting smaller. There's a story from a park ranger in the high Sierras who spent a week snowed into a lookout tower. He was a veteran, someone who didn't believe in ghosts or tall tales. On the third night, he heard a scratching on the trapdoor. It was subtle, not a frantic clawing, but slow, methodical drag of a fingernail across the wood. He knew he was the only one for 40 miles. He convinced himself it was a squirrel or a stray branch caught in the wind. He even sat on the trapdoor, reading a book, using his own body weight to prove there was nothing there. But as he sat there, he felt the wood beneath him get warm. Not just warm, feverish. He jumped up and stared at the door. The frost on the hinges was melting. Something was on the other side, and it was radiating a heat so intense it started to char the underside of the wood. He never opened it. He spent the next 4 days huddled in the corner of the tower, watching the wood turn black, listening to a voice that sounded like his own mother's, whispering his name through the floorboards. When the thaw finally came and he could get out, he checked the space under the tower. There were no tracks, no signs of fire, just a single, scorched handprint on the bottom of the trapdoor, exactly where he had been sitting. We trust our senses too much. We think because we can't see the threat, it isn't there. A woman once told me about a night she spent at a remote Airbnb. It was a beautiful A-frame with a loft. It started snowing, and she decided to turn off all the lights and just watch the flakes fall through the skylight. She fell asleep on the sofa, but woke up around 4 a.m. to a sound like wet fabric being dragged across the floor. She didn't open her eyes. She lay there listening. The sound moved from the kitchen into the living room and stopped right at the edge of the sofa. She could feel a presence, something cold and damp, like an open freezer door left ajar. She kept her eyes shut, her heart hammering, telling herself she was just having a night terror. Then, she felt a single drop of water hit her forehead. Then another. It was ice cold. She thought the roof was leaking from the snow. She finally opened her eyes to check the ceiling, but there was no leak. The ceiling was bone dry, but standing over her was a tall, translucent figure that looked like it was made of compressed slush. It wasn't dripping water. It was melting. It leaned over her, and as it did, she realized the water hitting her face was actually its tears. It didn't hurt her. It just stood there until it completely dissolved into a puddle on the hardwood. When she checked the news the next day, she found out the previous owner had vanished in a blizzard 3 years prior. They never found the body. They said the snow just took him. The scariest thing about the winter isn't that you might die in it. It's that you might become part of it. A piece of the landscape that only wakes up when the temperature drops. I made it back to my truck that night, but I didn't feel like I'd escaped. I felt like I'd been let go. Like something had finished looking at me and decided I wasn't what it was looking for yet. I looked in my rearview mirror as I pulled away, and for a split second, I didn't see my own reflection. I saw a pair of eyes made of frost, staring back from the back seat. I blinked and they were gone. Just a trick of the light. Just a smudge on the glass. That's what I tell myself every night when the snow starts to fall. But I still don't look in mirrors after midnight. And neither should you. Click the video on your screen to see what happened when the thaw finally came. Stay cold. Stay alert. And remember, at Forgotten Screams, we're always listening to the silence. The street lamps in small mountain towns don't really illuminate the darkness. They just make the shadows look deeper. When the snow is heavy enough, It creates a sort of visual white noise, a haze that makes you second-guess the distance of everything around you. I was driving through a town like that. One of those places that feels like it's being slowly swallowed by the pines. My headlights were cutting through the thick flakes, and for a second, I thought I saw a child standing on the sidewalk. I slowed down, my tires crunching softly on the unplowed road. But as I got closer, the shape changed. It wasn't a child. It was a mailbox wrapped in a heavy plastic tarp that had frozen into a jagged, human-like silhouette. I laughed at myself. A dry sound in the cabin of the truck. That's the first stage, the rationalization. Your brain takes something terrifying and forces it to be mundane. It has to, or you'd never pull over. I kept driving, but that feeling of being watched didn't dissolve with a laugh. Every few blocks, I'd see another mailbox or another frozen bush that looked just a little too much like a person hunched over, waiting for me to pass. I told myself it was the local aesthetic. Maybe they all used the same gray tarps. But then I noticed the tracks. In the fresh, pristine snow of the sidewalk, there were sets of footprints leading to each of these shapes, but none leading away. It looked like a dozen people had walked out to the edge of the road and just stopped. I stopped the truck in the middle of the street. The engine hummed, a low vibration that seemed to agitate the silence. I rolled the window down just a crack. The air that rushed and didn't smell like pine or wood smoke. It smelled like wet wool and old, stagnant water. And then I heard it. A soft, communal shuffling. Not from one direction, but from all of them. The shapes on the sidewalks, the mailboxes, the bushes, the tarps, they all shifted. Just an inch. A collective lean toward the warmth of my exhaust. I didn't wait to see if they'd take a step. I hit the gas, my back tires spinning for a terrifying second before catching traction. As I sped past the last house, I glanced at the porch light. A woman was standing there, staring at me. She wasn't moving. She was wrapped in the same gray tarp, her face a pale, frozen mask of indifference. She wasn't a victim. She was part of the landscape. If your heart is racing good, that means your instincts are still working. But instincts won't save you if you don't know what you're looking at. If you want to see the footage we've gathered from towns like this, places that don't appear on modern maps, you need to be part of the inner circle. Click that subscribe button and hit the notification bell. We're documenting the world as it actually is, not how they want you to see it. Comment they leaned. If you've ever felt like the objects in your yard weren't where you left them. There's a report from an icebreaker crew in the Arctic that I think about every time the temperature drops below zero. They were stuck in a pack of ice for 3 weeks, waiting for a lead to open. The sun hadn't been up in months. One of the deckhands, a guy who had spent 20 years at sea, started complaining about the hum. He said the ice wasn't just cracking. It was vibrating in a specific frequency. He claimed that if he put his ear to the steel hull, he could hear people talking underneath the ship. Not muffled voices, but clear, rhythmic chanting. The captain wrote it off as cabin fever, a common side effect of the polar night. But on the 14th day, the deckhand didn't show up for his shift. They found his boots on the deck, neatly lined up next to a hole in the ice that had been melted in a perfect circle. Not cut, melted. The water in the hole was boiling, despite the air being 40 below. They never found him. But for the rest of the voyage, the crew reported hearing and knocking on the hull, not from the outside, but from within the steel itself, like something had been folded into the metal. The most dangerous thing about the snow is how it erases time. You think you've been outside for 10 minutes, but the sun is already gone. A hiker in the Cascades once found an old Polaroid camera in a hollowed-out log. When he developed the film, he found 12 photos of himself sleeping in his tent from the night before. The photos were taken from a high angle, as if someone, or something, was hovering directly above him. The terrifying part wasn't the intruder. It was the background. In every photo, the snow outside the tent was a different height. In the first photo, it was at the base. In the last photo, the tent was almost entirely buried. According to the timestamps on the film, those 12 photos were taken over the span of only 6 minutes. The snow had fallen 6 feet in 6 minutes, then vanished completely by the time he woke up. He had no memory of the storm. He had no memory of the weight. He just had the photos of himself, looking peaceful, while the world tried to bury him in seconds. We think we are the masters of our environment because we have heaters and headlights. But winter is an ancient thing. It has a memory that spans further back than our cities. When you walk through a snowy field, you aren't just walking on water. You're walking on a shroud. And sometimes, the shroud likes to wrap itself around things that are still breathing. I finally made it out of that mountain town, but I noticed something when I got home. My truck was heavier. The gas mileage was terrible. When the sun came up the next day and the snow melted off the roof, I found something in the bed of the truck. It wasn't a person. It was just a heavy gray tarp, soaking wet and smelling like stagnant water. I don't own a tarp. I never have. I burned it in the backyard, but the smoke didn't rise. It just hung there, low to the ground, forming the shape of a person leaning against my fence, watching, waiting for the next frost. Click the video on your screen if you're brave enough to see what happens when the wind starts to speak your name. The smoke from that tarp didn't just linger, it seemed to wait. It sat there against the fence for hours, long after the fire had died, refusing to be dissipated by the breeze. That was the moment I stopped looking for logical explanations and started looking for patterns. Because that's the final stage of the cold. The realization that it's not a series of coincidences. It's a hunt. If you look back at everything, the footsteps that match your own, the heat under the trapdoor, the figures that stand on top of the powder, it all points to one thing. The snow isn't just a weather event. It's a medium. It's a way for something that doesn't have a body to finally take a shape. It borrows the white to make a limb. It borrows the silence to make a voice. I stayed inside for 3 days after the fire. I kept the curtains drawn, but you can't hide from the sound. Have you ever noticed how, during a heavy storm, the house begins to groan in ways that sound almost articulate? I sat in my living room, the fire roaring, and I began to hear my own name being shaped by the wind hitting the eaves of the roof. It wasn't a ghostly whisper. It was mechanical, a byproduct of air and wood that just happened to sound like me. Or at least, that's what I told myself as I turned up the radio. But the radio didn't play music. It played the sound of crunching snow, rhythmic, for steps. Stop. 3 steps. Stop. It was the broadcast of a walk I had taken a week ago, played back to me in real time. I realized then that I hadn't escaped the woods at all. I had just brought the woods home in my head. If you can hear that rhythm right now, the sound of your own heart or the hum of your computer, ask yourself if it's getting faster. You've followed me this far through the whiteout, and that means you're already part of the trail. If you want to see how this ends, and more importantly, how to survive when the frost hits your own windows, you need to stay connected. This is your final chance to hit that subscribe button and join the Forgotten Screams. We're the only ones documenting the thaw. Comment "I hear it" if the wind outside your house just changed pitch. Don't look away now. We're almost at the center of the storm. There's one last account, the one that ties the knots tight. It comes from an old man who lived alone in a cabin at the edge of a glacier. He was found by a search party in the spring, sitting in his armchair, perfectly preserved by the cold. There was no sign of struggle, no heater malfunction, but the cabin was filled floor to ceiling with snow. The doors and windows were all locked from the inside. The glass wasn't broken. The chimney was too narrow for a flurry, let alone a drift. The search party said it looked as if the air inside the room had simply turned into snow all at once, trapping him in a solid block of ice while he was reading. But the detail that kept the lead investigator awake for years was the book the man was holding. It wasn't a novel or a journal. It was a handwritten ledger. Thousands of pages, and every single line was just a date, a time, and a number. The numbers represented the number of flakes hitting his window per second. He had been counting them. For 40 years, he had been keeping track of the rhythm of the winter. On the final page, the handwriting changed. It became jagged, shaky. The last entry didn't have a number. It just said, It's not falling anymore. It's breathing. When the investigators looked at the snow that had filled the cabin, they noticed something impossible. The flakes weren't melting, even in the spring sun. They weren't made of water. They were made of bone. Tiny, microscopic fragments of human calcium, shaped into six-sided stars. I looked at my own hands after reading that report. I looked at the frost on my knuckles and the white dust on my floorboards. We think we're watching the weather, but we're actually watching a slow-motion arrival. Every winter, the world gets a little bit more crowded with things that don't belong. I don't go out in the snow anymore. I don't even look at it. I've boarded up the windows and moved my bed into the center of the house, away from the exterior walls, because I know now that the wheeze I heard behind my ear wasn't a man in a suit. It was the air itself, trying to find a way to become solid. The snow is falling again tonight. I can hear it tapping against the boards. It's not a random tap. It's a code. It's counting the seconds until I have to open the door to get more wood for the fire. It knows I'm running low. It knows the exact moment my internal temperature will start to drop. And when it does, I won't be alone. I'll just be another shape in the yard, wrapped in a gray tarp, waiting for someone like you to drive by and wonder why the mailbox looks so much like a man. Sleep with your lights on. Keep your fire burning. And whatever you do, don't count the flakes. Because once you start counting them, they start counting you. This has been Forgotten Screams. The frost is already on your glass. Can you feel it? Click the video on the screen to see the footage that proves everything I just told you is true. If you're still breathing, you're one of the lucky ones. For now.